Chapter 5 has probably been the most polarizing game of the series yet, with many fans and even non-fans labeling the game as a huge success, going beyond their expectations, along with many others saying that the game is downright awful, which includes people like Markiplier, who called it a mess and said that he was done covering the entire franchise because of it.
Continue slogging through this, and if I'm coming out of a game saying, wow, I slogged through that, might be time to reevaluate a couple things. Hope it's better next time. I won't know, because I'm not gonna play it.
What makes it even more interesting to me is that this isn't just random people on the internet arguing. You've got longtime fans of the series on both sides, you've got content creators with massive audiences completely written off the franchise because of this chapter, and then you've got the Steam reviews sitting at 85% positive. So what's actually going on here? Is Chapter 5 good? Is it bad? Why does nobody seem to agree? That's what I want to get into today, because I think the answer is actually more interesting than just some people liked it and some people didn't. Let's start before the game even came out, because honestly, the pre-release period tells you a lot about why the reception ended up the way it did. The first trailers dropped and they looked genuinely solid. Like, early in development, the game already had this level of visual polish that got people pretty excited. The cinematics looked good, the atmosphere felt right, and after the mess that was Chapter 4, people were cautiously optimistic, because then January rolled around and Mob Games announced the release date. And the moment people did the math and realised this was again going to be roughly a 1-year turnaround from Chapter 4, the mood shifted pretty fast. And look, I get why. Chapter 4 had that same 1-year development cycle, and it really showed. A lot of people, myself included, felt like that chapter was underdeveloped in some pretty fundamental ways. So hearing, yeah, we're doing the same time frame, but the game is going to be even bigger this time, was not exactly reassuring. To their credit, the devs came out and said multiple times that they'd genuinely listened to the feedback from the previous chapters, and that this one was going to be different. They were confident. They kept saying Chapter 5 was going to be the best entry in the series, and part of me wanted to believe that, but another part of me had heard that kind of thing before. Then the gameplay trailer hit about a week before release, and honestly, it just added more fuel to the fire. The character designs got a pretty rough reception. Lovebraids in particular got absolutely roasted online, and that criticism spread fast. But the thing that really killed the pre-release vibe was the leak. Someone got hold of the prototype's design and put it online days before launch. And the prototype has been this massive looming mystery for the entire series. Fans have been waiting years for that reveal. Having it just casually spoiled on social media before most people even had a chance to play the game was a real gut punch for a lot of the community. So going into release day, you had this weird mixture of genuine excitement and genuine dread sitting side by side. Some people were hyped, some people were braced for disappointment, and almost everyone had an opinion before they'd played a single second of it. February 18th comes around, the game drops, and the numbers are honestly kind of staggering. 100,000 copies sold in the first 3 hours, 52,000 concurrent players on Steam at peak. To put that in perspective, that peak player count is higher than every other chapter in the series combined. Not per chapter, combined. Chapter 5 was, by any commercial metric, a massive success. But here's the thing about bringing in that many players at once. You're not just getting your existing fanbase. You're getting people who are completely new to the series, people who haven't followed the lore, people who are jumping in because a content creator they watch is playing it, people who are curious because they keep seeing it trending. And all of those people come in with completely different expectations and completely different levels of context. That matters a lot, and I'll come back to it later because I think it's actually one of the most important things to understand about why this chapter is so divisive. Alright, let's get into the criticism, because there's a fair amount of it, and some of it is genuinely valid. The first big one, and probably the most common complaint I've seen, is that Chapter 5 introduces way too many new characters, and doesn't give most of them enough to do. And honestly, this one lands for me. The Wrong Side Out are a good example. they're in the intro, they show up in some collectibles, and that's basically it. They exist as this failed toy line concept that's thematically similar to the Smiling Critters, but they never really develop beyond that. They feel more like set dressing than actual characters. Chompkins is another one. His big moment in the game is hiding the player inside his mouth to protect them from the prototype, which sounds cool in theory. But the problem is that earlier in the same game, you were literally just hiding from the prototype yourself. So when Chompkins suddenly becomes this life-saving ally, it feels a bit inconsistent and rushed. It's like the game just needed a reason for him to be useful and kind of forced one in. Even Giblet, who I actually think is one of the more interesting additions, felt underutilized from a lore perspective to a lot of people. He works within the story, he has a clear role, but there's a sense that there's a lot more you could do with him that just doesn't happen. And this is kind of a pattern with Poppy Playtime in general. There are so many characters cycling in and out that it's hard to get genuinely attached to any of them before they're gone. Chapter 5 has this problem more than most. Character designs also got a lot of heat. Lily Lovebraids before the game even released, Giblet after. And the prototype himself was surprisingly controversial for a character people had been hyped about for years. A lot of people felt like his face design was a bit generic, leaning into that same wide creepy smile aesthetic that basically every recent Poppy character has now. Which, to be fair, has just become a visual signature of the franchise at this point, for better or worse. Moving into gameplay, the chase sequences are where I think the criticism is most justified, specifically the Lily Lovebraids and prototype chases, which are clearly trying to do interesting things with the new grab pack mechanics and the updated movement options. But they're designed in a way that's almost impossible to read on a first attempt. You're getting cut off, you're dying, you're not really sure what you did wrong or what you're supposed to do differently. It becomes this cycle of trial and error that doesn't feel like a skill challenge so much as just memorization through repeated failure. The Huggy chases don't really have this problem, they're more readable, but those specific sequences definitely do. The puzzles are a similar story. A lot of the puzzle rooms in Chapter 5 contain two separate puzzles, one that progresses the game and one that rewards a collectible. And a lot of the time, it's genuinely not clear which is which. You can spend a while solving something and then realize you just got a collectible and still have no idea how to actually move forward. On top of that, the collectible puzzles are often harder than the story progression ones, which is a strange design choice. It means you're getting the most friction from the content that's the least essential. Then there's the horror. This one is more subjective, but it came up enough that it's worth talking about. The lore and story content in Chapter 5 is dark, genuinely unsettling in a lot of places, but the actual gameplay experience doesn't always match that tone. There are jump scares and tense moments, but that deep environmental dread, that feeling of the world itself being wrong, doesn't really show up the way it did in Chapter 3. That dream sequence from Chapter 3 is the benchmark a lot of people use, and nothing in Chapter 5 quite reaches that level of atmospheric horror. So with all of that laid out, is Chapter 5 bad? I don't think so. In fact, I think there's a lot genuinely worth praising here, and I want to make that case. The new characters, even the ones that feel underutilized, are mostly fun to spend time with. Lily Lovebraids is a great example. People clowned on her design before release, and then she turned out to be one of the most entertaining presences in the whole game. Her story is actually really good, and the voice work sells it. And the prototype's reveal, the actual in-game moment of it, was pulled off really well. All that pre-release anxiety about it being anticlimactic, I don't think that held up. The reveal landed. The ending is also something I want to highlight specifically, because a lot of people were nervous about this. Going into Chapter 5, knowing it wasn't the final chapter, there was this worry that the story would feel unresolved in an unsatisfying way, like it was just dragging things out. But I think they actually threaded that needle pretty well. The story moves forward in meaningful ways, the stakes feel real, and it leaves you genuinely curious about where things go next, rather than just frustrated that it isn't over yet. Gameplay-wise, the thing I appreciate most about Chapter 5 is that it actually tries things. Chapter 4 was criticized for being mechanically thin, not much new to do, not many new ideas. Chapter 5 goes in the complete opposite direction. The The pressure hand, the elemental hand, the new puzzle structures. There's a lot of new stuff here. Not all of it is perfectly executed. I've already talked about where it falls short, but the ambition is real. And I take ambitious and flawed over safe and boring any day. The puzzles specifically, even when they're confusing, have this quality where when you finally figure out what you're supposed to do, it feels genuinely satisfying. That moment of the pieces clicking into place is what these kinds of games live and die by for me. And Chapter 5 gives you that feeling more consistently than I expected. Something that I don't think gets brought up enough is how much more polished this game feels compared to previous entries. Poppy Playtime has always been pretty glitchy. There are bugs in the good chapters that are basically impossible to miss. Chapter 5 felt noticeably cleaner than anything that's come before it. That's a real improvement, and it matters. Pacing is another win. Chapter 4 had this issue where it would just stop momentum. You'd be walking through a corridor or sitting through a long cutscene, and the energy would just drain out. Chapter 5 is a lot better at keeping things moving. Dialogue happens while you're still exploring. The cassette tape system replaces the old VHS tape system, and it's a meaningful upgrade. You pick up a tape and you can keep moving while it plays, then replay it later if you want. You can skip loading screens, skip def messages. Globy helps orient you so you're not constantly lost. None of these are huge individual changes, but together they make the experience feel a lot more respectful of your time. Okay, so I've covered the complaints and I've made the case for why I think the game is good, but I haven't really answered the central question, which is why this chapter specifically has produced such extreme reactions in both directions. And I think the most important piece of this puzzle came from Markiplier's playthrough. Now look, Markiplier calling Chapter 5 a mess and saying he's done with the franchise was a big moment. That's a huge creator with an enormous audience making a very strong statement about a game while playing it live. That's going to amplify things significantly. And his frustrations with the chapter are largely the same ones I've already talked about. The design issues with the chases, the confusing puzzles, the character overload. Those are real criticisms. And if they hit hard enough to make someone not want to continue with the series, that's a valid response. But the thing he said that I found most interesting was about the story. He said it just didn't make sense to him, that the game was moving him from area to area and introducing characters without giving him the context to understand who they were or why any of it mattered. And here's where I think the real issue lies. Because technically, the game does explain itself. The lore is there, the story is there, but almost none of it is delivered through the main playthrough in an obvious way. It's in the cassette tapes, it's in the lore notes scattered around the environment, it's in the collectibles. If you play Chapter 5 and only engage with what the game puts directly in front of you without going out of your way to find and absorb the supplementary material, the story is going to feel thin and disconnected. Now, I personally love that about it. I love that there's this whole other layer of storytelling underneath the surface that rewards you for being curious and thorough. Playing through it once and then going back and connecting all the dots is genuinely fun for me. But I also understand that not everyone plays games that way. And if you're a massive content creator playing a game in front of millions of people, you're probably not stopping every 5 minutes to read every lore note in detail. This is almost exactly the same criticism that gets leveled at Five Nights at Freddy's constantly. If you're not willing to go deep on the lore, if you're just watching the surface level story, a lot of it feels random and unearned. It's not that the story doesn't exist. It's that it requires a specific kind of engagement to access it properly. So when you take that and combine it with the fact that Chapter 5 brought in more than double the players of Chapter 4, you've got a massive influx of people who are brand new to the series, trying to make sense of a story that's been building across multiple entries. Of course it's going to feel confusing to them. They don't have the context. And those people are going to come away with a very different experience than someone who's been following every detail since Chapter 1. Add to that the portion of the mascot horror fanbase that has never really warmed to Poppy Playtime. The people who feel like the franchise kind of barged into the genre and shifted the cultural conversation in ways they weren't happy about. Those people already have their guard up going in. Give them a chapter with some real design flaws and a story that requires homework to understand, and you've handed them everything they need to write the whole thing off. That's the storm you're looking at. New players without context, lore that doesn't surface itself, genuine design flaws that are easy to point to, and a pre-existing critical audience. No wonder the reactions are all over the place. Chapter 5 is not a perfect game. The character introductions are too rapid for most of them to land properly. Some of the chase sequences are poorly signposted. The puzzle design has real issues. The horror atmosphere doesn't always match the darkness of the lore. These are real problems, and they're worth acknowledging. But it's also a game that's more ambitious, more polished, and more mechanically interesting than what came before it. The story, if you actually engage with all of it, is compelling. The prototype's reveal is great. The ending sets things up well. The quality of life improvements make it feel like the developers actually listened this time around. The 85% positive rating on Steam tells its own story. That's better than Chapter 4 by a significant margin, and it's close to matching the franchise's most beloved entries. For a game that had this much pre-release drama and came in with this much skepticism, that's a meaningful result. Is Chapter 5 the best Poppy Playtime chapter? I don't think I'd say that definitively, but is it a disappointment? For me, no, not even close. It's a game with real ambition and real flaws, and I think how much you enjoy it probably depends a lot on how much you're already invested in the world and how deeply you're willing to dig into what it's offering. If you're someone who's been following the lore closely, paying attention to the details, genuinely curious about where this story is going, I think there's a lot here for you. If you're coming in fresh or just playing through the main path without engaging with the supplementary content, your mileage is going to vary a lot. Anyway, that's my take on it. I'm curious where you guys land on this one. Let me know in the comments.